All right, and I just saw the icon pop up in the top right there. So we are live on Facebook. So you can go ahead, head over to the Advocacy Project page if you weren't already there, and find that live streaming. Share that via sharing it to your page, hosting a watch party, whatever works well for you. And that just continues to spread the message. It also opens up new dialogue. I've had some dialogue with folks who saw a message or saw the posting on the Facebook page, caught a few minutes, and then had some questions. So it's really it's really a powerful tool if we just will leverage it out. So I'm gonna practice what I preach and share it here myself. We'll be getting started in just another minute or two as we allow a few more people to join us. All right, Thomas, why don't I hand it over to you to kick us off? And I know everybody enjoys our few minutes that we generally spend at the beginning with Michelle leading us through some breathing exercises to kind of release the week. But unfortunately, she was not available tonight, and I'm not about to try and make that an impersonation that I do. I don't know, Thomas, you want to give it a shot?
Absolutely not.
Take 3 quick big breaths.
I am still sharing on a couple pages. I'll be done here soon.
So we found something that both Thomas and I agree we are not good at. That's leading breathing exercises. You can't be good at everything. Brittany, did I hear you in the background volunteering to do it?
I think she was, actually.
I think everyone is capable of taking 3 4-4 box breaths, and we should all learn to do it. So sure, I'll talk us through it. I'm not going to be all fancy like Michelle, but let's go ahead and root into your seat. Root your feet onto the ground. Go ahead and close your eyes. Might be helpful to rest your palms to the sky and take a big deep breath in. I'm going to give us a 4 count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do that one more time. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's all I got for you guys.
I was just getting into it. I was like, all right, this could work. Could work.
All right. So hopefully that was sufficient for what we're going to be talking about tonight. Is my video on?
Yeah, it's cooking.
There we go. Good evening, everybody. So tonight we are wrapping up our discussion on anti-racism. Are you controlling the PowerPoint?
I'm sharing the screen, so you can take over.
we're wrapping up our 4-part series on anti-racism, and then we are going to be taking a 4-week intermission on the Operation Ally programming. There will still be other programming taking place. Just follow the page. If you're not a member of the Operation Ally group, then join the Facebook group. If you are not on our email list, then please provide us an email so that we can get you on our email list, and then you can stay in the loop in what's going on. In the meantime, until we come. Sorry, problems with my phone. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So we've been talking about racism. We've been talking about white supremacy, racialization of space, how that has led to what Dr. Mills coined the racial contract. And we've talked about how that has worked to be codified in various systems to work to make up the network of white supremacy that we call systemic racism. Tonight, we are wrapping that up in a way that hopefully brings a bit of temporary closure to this aspect of the discussion. Obviously, the work and the discussion continues, but I think reparations is the ultimate point of this conversation. If you're just here to talk, then okay, fine, we've talked. What are we going to do about it now that we've talked? And that's what we're here to discuss. Sorry, I'm still downloading the slide. Anything you want to add to that, Jason, before we get started?
Yeah, so, let's kind of put the elephant out in the room, right? When the topic of reparations come up, even very well-meaning people, including this guy right here, kind of recoil like, oh my gosh, now it's going to get real. And, I have that response, even as a person who, in theory, stands to directly benefit from any sort of governmental reparations for what has been done to the Black community as a whole. So I can only imagine what that is like for someone who's not even in the Black community, but has been a supporter, an ally. Can't even imagine what that would be like, and the different juxtaposition of emotions that would be going on. So what I think would be most advantageous for us is to sit in a position to simply learn and see what we can be comfortable with. By no means do have Thomas and I in any portion of this proclaim to have all the answers. But what we do want to do is have provocative conversations that will lead to something being done. At the end of the day, if all we do is admire the problem, what's the point? Let's get some action in place that actually works to correct existing issues, even if we're uncomfortable with it for a little bit. So let's just approach it from that sort of a mindset to begin with and see where it takes us from there.
Well, and I want to be clear, because the goal is hopefully we challenge some social expectations. Hopefully something is said to jog some comfort, right, as we investigate the bounds of transformative versus performative. What are we doing here, right? I still think we are several weeks in We've seen much progress as far as various movements established, some policies being done. We've seen declarations of racism, much action and movement, but ultimately, what is it for if it's not to repair what has been done? So the goal here is to have a community conversation, right? Bring your ideas, be bold. We need bold action and bold ideas. But to get started, we're talking about humanity, okay? I want to open the conversation up with some very broad questions. What is the purpose of life? What does it mean to be able to pursue happiness? Is the existence of a labor class always necessary? And if so, what does the purpose / value of life suggest about the lowest acceptable standard of living for the labor class? A few people, hopefully, if you're willing to chime in here on these questions, but generally what we're getting at here is when we talk about human, what does that mean? What is the qualitative and quantitative value that we are putting to that being, so that no matter how far off you are, the lowest bottom of whatever social ladder you're on, social or economic ladder, what does that mean for us, right? Anybody have any input here?
So since I was, kind of jolted awake this morning when Thomas texted me this at 5 o'clock in the morning, or no, it was 8:30 in the morning. I was like, purpose of life question before 9 a.m. Let me get a cup of coffee. I'll take the first stab at it and give you all some time to mull over the question while we discuss, because these are very meaningful questions, and I think in many different environments we've thought about and talked about what is the purpose of life. And if you're coming from a faith perspective, it's to glorify God and extend his kingdom. If you're coming from a family perspective, it's to provide for, protect, and proliferate your family, right? I think about this in the context of this conversation being a national discussion around race, equality, and equity. What is the meaning of life as a government should view it? And I think this is one place where we look at the statement that our founding fathers made as a very accurate statement. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, freedom and justice for all. Now, if we could actually get that all to include everybody, I think we'd be on a pretty good start to discovering the meaning of life, to allow people the self-determination to pursue the things that cause them happiness and help to positively advance society. So that's my thought on it, and that's my opportunity for you guys to think and now get some feedback from the audience.
It's okay. We have some shy people here.
I want to say something.
Oh, there you go, Rhonda. Come on in.
I think the purpose of life, if I'm looking at it, when that question is posed, the first thing that comes to my mind is from a spiritual perspective. I think we're all here expressing, we're an extension of the universe, God, universe, whatever you want to call it. And we are all here to express ourselves through that. And we pursue our happiness in whatever it is we love and choose to express. And that is in turn an extension of the creator, whoever the creator, whatever the creator is. I'm not super religious. I'm just feeling like there is a bigger source, and that we are put here to pursue our happiness through through our expression. And I don't know if I'm supposed to answer any other questions, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind on those two questions.
Y'all didn't know it was philosophy class tonight, did
Y'all
you?
didn't know. And here you are.
Well, and Rhonda, I think that's an excellent point, right? Because spirituality comes from different places, and it doesn't have to come from Christianity or Buddhism or Judaism. It could come from any different lens, right? But that interconnectivity of what makes us all, you know, a part of the universe, the fact that we're all made of the same fundamental compounds, right? Like that oneness, you know, that speaks to something. You know, I certainly agree with that, whether you're coming from a religious perspective or just a strictly spiritual perspective.
So in the chat,
Can I chime in?
Yes, please.
I'm just going to speak from an American standpoint. And why I have gotten involved in this is I was surprised that it's not an equal opportunity for everybody. People come to our country because they think, yes, you work hard, you know, it's the American dream, you can accomplish anything. And that's what I've grown up with. But as I learn more and hear you speak, it's not an equal opportunity for everybody.
Tonight on 710 ESPN.
Are you being able to hear me?
Yeah.
yep.
Oh,
Had a
and
brief-
Morning tonight, ESPN LA power play number.
I don't know what that feedback is, but I'm sad, you know, and I'm getting a lot of pushback from people in my friend circle. And I think, you know, why are we doing this? You know, it's not, you know, yes, I want everything for my family. I want the best life possible, but I think that should be available to everyone else too. And we're seeing so much inequity and so much injustice. And it's like, why should you all have to work so hard to get it through to us? You know, we need to come along and say it's not right. And that's where I'm at. So.
Thank you for sharing that, Kate, and you know, showing a little bit of vulnerability there. I could tell that wasn't the easiest thing for you to express.
Yeah.
That's what we need to move the ball forward, is acknowledging this is a hard fight, and you know, sometimes it does mean jeopardizing the quality of some relationships that we hold. And you know, I want to acknowledge that I recognize that each person who has chosen to be an ally puts themselves at a risk that they didn't have 6 months ago. So I just want to acknowledge that with you.
Thank you. Well, I'll just add to that, because I have some particularly bad days, but then I think, okay, I have a choice here. I can give up and I can say, I'm not going to fight this, but I've learned too much to just take a blind eye and say, it's all okay. It's not. So, you know, now that I'm kind of in, I've got to continue.
You're all in, Kate. All in, Kate.
So,
Well, so okay, so the questions here are posed here because the United States is special. Like, no matter where you are in your thinking of our current status, this country is special. It's special because we are a social experiment that started out with the structure that we did, right? And then we started to see other countries come with constitutions, but right, Britain had the Magna Carta, you know, but it was still a monarch when the United States was founded. So for us to establish a government of, for, by the people, right, with the conceptualization of freedom that was put into those documents, that is what makes America great, right? America then has been at tension with that identity since really its founding. But an undertone in that entire existence has been the existence of a subclass, right? We've had slavery, and then as we've gone and spent time, I'm not going to go over it again, right? But we've had systems where non-white individuals, and in a lot of cases, white individuals, were used as labor classes in order to propagate or support the massive financial institution that the United States is, right? And so when we talk about the unique inherent aspect of freedom that the United States is, but that aspect of freedom has always seemed to have come with the price of a labor class, is that necessary, right? And so my question is, if it is necessary, right? Say you are the ultimate free enterprise capitalist to say, hey, there are going to be some people that rise to the top, and those people who rise to the top should be given unfettered access to the top. And in doing so, there are going to be people who lose because, hey, they got to eat, right? Even if you're that type of person, there has to be some level, some base at which you have to protect others. Otherwise, there's no more security for all that is being acquired, right? So I want to have a pragmatic conversation, and I want to have a philosophical conversation. If you're a capitalist, I want to understand, if you think that this is what humanity is on a base level, that means that the labor class at the base level would be entitled to that base entitlement, right? And so the definition of what that ultimately becomes is what this discussion is, and why we think that this conversation, not only on racism and systemic racism, but reparations in specific, zero us in on. Jason, anything on that?
So you mentioned something, and I just want to agree with and reiterate, because I think there's oftentimes a divide in people's mind in how men and women like Thomas and I communicate about the changes that need to occur in America, and how we feel about this country's status and the opportunity that exists within it. Because, you know, as Thomas said, there are some unique beauties in the American culture, in the American system. And for me, the thing that I've been able to hang my hat on and say, I'm proud of America because I believe she's strong enough to overcome the problems she faces, because she's overcome stronger ones in the past. And that's where my value, my American identity is rooted in the fact that ingrained into the DNA of our country is the ability for the people to direct the policies. Now, does that always play out with purity and in its best form? Absolutely not. That's why we're having the conversations that we are. But we have the ability to overcome, and we even went to a civil war to more properly represent what is written into our DNA. So I just want to magnify that part of the conversation, because so often it gets lost in, well, you guys just hate America. No, that's not it at all. That's why I'm not leaving the country. I'm here because I believe at the core of America is rooted the ability for me to influence and change America to be a more perfect union. So I'll leave it at that.
Jason, you made me think of a quote. I think it was Beyonce that said it, or someone but I've seen people holding signs saying this. Racism is so much a part of America that when you're protesting the injustices, they think you're protesting America. So they can't see it because just because, you know, people are kneeling during the flag, it's for injustice. They feel like you're boycotting or being unappreciative of the country we live in. So it's so inbred.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, but what I also think is interesting is when I think about the inherency of what America is, I think about protest, right? I think about the no taxation without representation. I think about the Boston Tea Party. I think about the rebellion, the fact that what you were giving us was not good enough, right? And we are naturally endowed with powers and gifts of freedom, right, that should be flourished in our government, not stifled and tacked to some arbitrary leader, right? And so that is what is so beautiful about the American spirit is we took a step and said, no, what you are saying humanity is not good enough. But what humanity means to us is this, and it is at least life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are not empty promises. These are promises that are legally protected, and the Equal Protection Clause literally make them broad stroke across the board, right? So when we're talking about what it means to be American, what it means to be human in the American sense, we're not asking for anything other than what has already been promised. And Dr. King talked about this in his "I Have a Dream" speech, right? We're here to cash a check, but this goes back to Rhonda, your point. White supremacy is very rooted, deeply rooted here in the United States, and so it's so rooted that we don't call white supremacy or white, we call it white privilege, right? And so we recognize that the privileges that are associated with whiteness are definitely the privileges that would be associated with humanity, right? Aristotle had the climate theory where he stated humans from places with extremely hot or extremely cold temperatures are more given to beast-like qualities, right? And so then they started to categorize humans based on whether or not you're more human or more animal. And so that spectrum of human animal has been the justification for why people who are non-white has been treated as less than human, right? And so this allows for Christians who believe that they're living the upright life. This allows for people who believe that they're living the moral life to take judgment on people who are non-white, because there's this conditioning that unless you are white, you have closer to animalistic qualities. And so unless we see anything that doesn't look white, it is less than civil. It is closer to animal. And therefore, seeing it put down in the street, see it put in cages, see it being hunted, these are things that are non-problematic to us because we see animals, right? And so that's where we get the justifications like, well, he should have just complied. He should have just followed the rules. Why? Because those rules are us saying, well, he should have been civilized, right? He should have acted white. And because he didn't act white, he's fallen below whiteness on that human spectrum. And being treated as less than human, i.e. not having life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or property, is then justified because now your humanity has been stripped from you because of your perception of less than whiteness, right? So white supremacy is that artificial power to define what it is to be human. And when you get to define what it is to be human, those people who meet that threshold are then provided the privileges, right, of humanity, when in reality they shouldn't be considered privileges because we're all human, right? They should be standards that we all come to expect, especially from a constitution that promises equal protection and due process under the law. And so when we talk about privileges, again, we're talking about simple recognition of full humanity. And that means like simple things like being able to walk throughout society without fear of your of invasion of your space, being able to engage in interaction with people and being taken seriously and being judged for the merits, right? Not for anything else, not for the way you look or anything else. Having lower acceptability standards of reasonableness. We have a standard for what it means to be reasonable. And if you're white or you're white male, then that reasonableness kind of morphs, right, to who it is you are. You can do extraordinary things, bad things like shoot up schools, and then you become the exception, the negative exception to the rule, right? And so that reasonableness, that unreasonableness means that there's something wrong with just you, as opposed to the people, where if one person does something slightly negative, then that negativity gets attributed to the entire group, right? So that doesn't happen when you have a lower standard of everybody saying, here is what reasonableness is, and we're going to hold you to this standard, and that's not going to change depending on your race. Freedom to navigate and circumvent spaces at will, and then the ability to dream and pursue without obstruction of artificially constructed social consequence, meaning your sex, your gender, your race are not reasons, your age are not reasons that you are being categorically denied access to your dreams or pursuit of your dreams, because they're artificially and socially constructed consequences that are beyond your particular capacity or will.
So I know we've done this a lot throughout the time, but just had an example of this idea of not being able to move around at will within society without certain fear of your life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Today, my young son needed to go to the dentist, and I was wearing this shirt, which, if you can see it, is the American flag. Written through it is Black Lives Matter. And for many different reasons, people have a problem with the statement that Black Lives Matter. Mostly because they don't understand the difference between a movement and an organization. But regardless, think about the preposterous situation that I was in, that going to the dentist, I had to care for the quality of care my son would receive based on me wearing a shirt that simply declares my life, his life matters. I had a genuine concern. Should I change this shirt so that the dentist treats my son properly? Just in what other spaces of life is that a consideration? So just wanted to throw that out because it was a today example.
Well, I mean, another example that's been heavy on my spirit is being in a lot of business meetings with public officials. We talk about, getting resources to the Black community, and they always are talking about you guys. We had, I mean, I'm not going to disclose the district, but had a district literally tell a African-American museum that you have to prove to us that you actually provide programming to the community, our community, for us to give you grant funding. Like are the Black residents that are served through that museum and all of the students that go through to get the services are not a part of that community? Like that separation from the institution to the Black community is in the language, right? So listen to public officials talk. Listen to them talk about the fact that we're giving resources to them, right? We are helping them. We are doing this for that community, right? What's the difference in our communities, right? Where you are saying we, i.e. the United States, and giving it to that, i.e. some community other than the United States, or other than this city, or other than the community at large, right? So just that's something I really want you to listen to, because ever since that happened in that meeting, I felt so degraded in that meeting, and it's happened so often since, where people are saying that. Just listen to the way people are using their language in relation and correspondence to the Black community, and how they are defining the Black community within the global community where all the resources are. That's, I don't know. I was trying to stay away from the personal, Jason.
Why? That's why we're here, brother.
And so, yeah, anti-racism means that basically there is no white privilege. That privilege becomes the standard for humanity, right? So being accepted in the global we, not having fear of what it is you're wearing, defining whether or not you're having good access to healthcare, where people have sworn to do no harm. You know, there's so many implications to this that are so insidious, and they can be pernicious if not monitored. And that's what this conversation is about. So how do we establish humanity for all? I'm a planner, I'm a thinker, I see things in phases, right? So to me, it looks like defining what that standard is. And quite honestly, I don't know what other laws are necessary than the ones that are on the books, right? So if we take the laws that we have and actually stick to the language, okay, then we have that definition of what it means to be human. We have the quality of what it means to be human. The Supreme Court has read into the Constitution the substantive due process clause, and I know I'm about to get a little lawyery, but right, the substantive due process clause is the reason why we have abortion, rights to abortion, marriage, reproductive rights. None of that stuff is protected under the Constitution. But the Supreme Court said when the constructors and the creators of this nation developed the US Constitution, they had a vision of freedom in mind when they wrote those documents. And so if we were to extrapolate that vision of freedom to this particular issue, then it would result in this. And so even though there's no substantive due process clause in the Constitution, the US Supreme Court has made it one, right? So we have that vision of freedom. But if you look throughout law, the question has not been whether or not you're entitled to that, or whether or not that this is free or not. The question has been whether or not you're entitled to it based upon your citizenship. And citizenship was defined as white male property owners, right? And then was expanded throughout time in order to encapsulate other groups, right? But the 15th Amendment through the Voting Rights Act and the 14th Amendment, due process and equal protection clause makes us equally entitled to all of the privileges of whiteness that is envisioned under the Constitution. So that same vision of freedom that is read into the substantive due process, that same vision can be expanded to all walks of life, including what it's like to disobey orders in the street when you've shown yourself to be no lethal threat. And so we break down these laws, get the policy, and then we fund the policy, fund the programs. And this is where we're starting to get a breakdown into the program, into where we are, right? Because we have some of the policies, right? But how are they being funded? Where's that funding going to? How are we measuring those programs in relation to our outcomes and our outputs, right? We don't have particular outputs and we don't have outcomes. We just have a standard. And so the output and the outcome allows us to say, if we are doing this right, humanity looks like people being able to have access to these rights. And the outcome of that is going to be greater economic output, is going to be greater social health, less incidents of mental health, of poor mental health, etc. breaking down those things into real outcomes, and then looking into those outcomes and then chasing after those outcomes with an equity lens means that we are leaning a lot more on the communities themselves to provide these programs, rather than having outsiders go into those communities and then do what they think is best for those particular communities, if that makes sense. Jason?
Yeah, and that last part is the part that I think has been the missing link, or the place where everything has fallen through the cracks in the attempts at making things right. You have, for example, the NFL starting tonight, and they had agreed to do certain things and direct funds. You have all of these corporations who have agreed to send $100 million over the next 10 years to areas and arenas that impact the Black community. But then who sits on the board to decide what impact to the Black community is and what is betterment? And that's why when we talk about being anti-racist, we talk about helping people get into the positions of power to make those decisions, to lending your voice and your platform to those who can speak from the community for the community. Because we all know I can come in and tell you how to arrange your home, but it's not going to be as effective because I don't know that you have children or someone with disability or someone who, whatever the case may be. Let us resolve our own issues. If you got $100 million to direct at the Black community, we should have a board in place that is directing those funds where they're needed, not a group of people from outside of the community saying, well, hey, what we would want, what we deem civil or human or basic rights is X. And that goes back to the very first or second slide that Thomas had up, as white supremacy being the artificial power to define what is humanity. And even in these attempts at correcting existing problems, the power structure has remained predominantly white. I was just reading an article this morning or 2 mornings ago on all of these companies who pledged these things. There was a study done on the 50 most powerful of them, and in the CEO and top 5 positions. So top 5 positions in all these corporations, there was 297 positions available across all these different companies. And I think 6 of them were held by Black people. But they're all pledging to diversity and inclusion, and we'll throw some money at it and we'll hire more Black people. But where do they sit in the power structure? How open are they to those pieces? So I know I'm kind of jumping ahead and I'm getting on my high horse. So I'll flip it back to you, Thomas.
Well, and actually that's the foundation of this conversation, right? Because we can just end the PowerPoint and just talk about that. What power are you willing to give up in the name of anti-racism, right? It's performative if you're not willing to give up some power that you have. And so I think that's a good question. But I think this gets to the point that there needs to be inclusive, diverse, and broad policies spectrum in order to make sure that the policies are actually being responsive to the needs. But we also have to remember intersectionality here, right? When we talk about different groups being able to define their own needs. An example was used in a talk that I've done earlier this week, where you had Black women who were basically left out of a employment discrimination case because they were the company had dealt with Black people and had dealt with women, but had not dealt with Black women in particular. And that lack of specificity, actually, I believe it was mentioned last week as well in our gender talk, which was very well done. that type of representation, that lacking representation in policies and the programs that come from those policies ultimately result in higher barriers to entry, so that even though the resources are there, the funding is there, you're going to talk to a lot of people and there's billions of dollars that goes towards homelessness, that goes toward all these different resources, yet these issues aren't being solved. That's because the barriers of entry are too high. Right. And so in order to reduce them, in order to encourage increased accessibility, and in order to provide the resources in a way that allow people the openness to investigate their alternatives adequately, and the educational system that is culturally specific enough to do so, it has to be done within that community, by that community. And that community needs to be defined in really almost as narrow a way as possible in order to make sure that we are encapsulating the true essence of freedom that was meant by the founders of this nation. And so that brings us to the reparations part of the discussion. We're going to go through some foundational concepts, and then hopefully the goal is to open it up. We do have a hard 7 stop, so let's get going. Just understand reparations. The reparations discussion is not new to the United States. You've heard people talk about the 40 acres and the mule. Well, that came from literally a reparations order that was passed after the Civil War. It was literally promised under this field order. However, Andrew Johnson became president after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, and then reneged on that particular order. So when you hear Black people talk about the 40 acres, that is literally a contract, an agreement, an order that was made with the government, where people had literally made plans to uproot their lives, to relocate to this area, just to have the government come through and snatch it away from under them. And they end up having to live in those same lands, but work for the same exact people that had previously enslaved them. So we had the abolition of slavery, and then we had this reparations order come in, and then we had the US government renege on that particular agreement or order. And so what we're talking about here is a little deeper than just money. We're talking about wealth, right? And so you can see that the median wealth gap, you can see the difference between the two. I'm just going to go to 2016. The white median wealth gap is 142,180 compared to the median wealth of African Americans or Black, which is 13,460. Now, this graph tells us more than just that, right? Because over here we see the mean wealth, which is the average. Okay, and so the average, you're looking to take the top and the bottom, you add them together and you divide it by 2, right? Notice how vastly different these two are, right? So we're talking about one, well, and there's the relationship between the median and the mean itself. If you're talking about the median, you're literally talking about the very middle number on the list of all of the wealth inputs for that particular data point. Jason, help me out here if I'm not making this sound right. But you have a list of data points where you have the numbers that are there. The median is literally the middle number. Okay, so when you see the middle number be 13,000, that means the middle wealth place in America for Black Americans is 13,000 for wealth, 142,000 for white individuals. But the average, that means you're taking into account how high this goes, then bounces all the way up to 900,000, because that's how vast the wealth is at the top compared to where it is in the center. Okay, so this not only means that there's a difference between races, but this also means there's a difference between classes in those races, where there's such a substantial difference between the middle point of those data points and the actual average point of those data points. It's statistics. I know a lot of people don't like statistics, but that should just drive you nuts, that disparity there.
Yes.
Did I
Yeah.
do
And
that right?
I've seen more up-to-date numbers on this just because of my field. And it's still the same. And that the thing that we always point to is a 10 times multiple, which you see in both the median and the mean. You're right about a 10 times multiple. The median wealth and the mean wealth, you have this huge gap. And what I really point to is look at on the mean wealth side, the standard of living, the lifestyle afforded at 100,000 is one thing. You know, here in Southern California, $100,000 for a 2-income household, a family, that you're supporting. That's about, okay, you're getting by, you're not doing great, you're not struggling month to month, things are happening for you. But you look at $900,000, that's a completely different lifestyle. It's a completely different world. And what you're able to do, and I know this is associated to wealth, not income, but even leveraging your wealth, you could leverage $900,000 out to purchase several businesses, purchase several homes. At 100,000, you're getting into a basic home in Southern California.
I mean, you can afford bail. You can pay for tuition.
That gets you
right?
no bail.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, you don't have to post bail. You literally put it up as collateral and just show up to court and you're good. So there's a lot of privileges that are hidden in that 900,000 wealth. But then again, we're talking about the mean. So there's a lot of outliers probably at the top that drives this nuts. But this graph, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but basically we're talking about the difference between wealth and income. Income alone is not enough. We can see there's been fluctuations of income, but wealth has been, income has been steady, but wealth has been up and down, right? So different ways that you lose wealth is also something to be considered, but you can look at the static nature of white wealth, and you see that there are far more pitfalls in this system that impact the ability to maintain wealth and grow wealth in the Black community as opposed to the white community. And so to me, in a capitalistic society where we've pledged ourselves to choice and competition, because if you don't have choice and competition, then that means there is some sort of monopoly of violence or requirement or force or imposition of force, which is usually going to be by the state, right? So capitalism in and of itself requires there to be a opportunity of choice and competition, but that choice and competition has been categorically denied from the descendants of slaves and many others who suffered real systemic and institutional discrimination, to the point where housing, education, health, and income have all been collaterals in this particular type of discrimination, right? So an equity lens and will say, well, we need to do more to these particular groups in order to get them to that baseline of what we say is the standard for humanity. And I would argue that under a capitalist system that could afford it, these rights should expand to everybody, at least at a base level. So in humanity, we're talking about a safe access to housing. We're talking about clean and adequate housing, good education that reinforces your aspects of identity, not denigrate them, healthcare that works to expand your ability to flourish, not have you dying literally a decade sooner than your counterparts who have just more money, and then income that provides you a basic standard of living so that you can afford not only these things, but the qualities of life that we say are envisioned and inherent in what it means to be a free human being. And so reparation ideas, land subsidies. This goes strictly to the fact that redlining was a legal violation that occurred on behalf of the federal government after the Equal Protection Clause was passed. That means that the US government was in direct violation of the law when it denied access to land and property to minority individuals under its redlining act that maintained until 1965. So there should be a land subsidy that allows for wealth to be aggregated through that particular capture. Voting access, there should be absolutely no restrictions on access to representation. Voting should be open access. Once you turn 18, you're automatically registered, and you automatically have access to voting places within the reasonable means of your social space. Right? So we can figure out a way to make schools voting places. Where do we go on our daily life that can be secured voting places for people to engage, right? Kids do go to school and parents have to drop them off there. That might be a good place to put up a voting place, but we have to be thinking of taking away the access or limitations to access to representation. There should be educational loan forgiveness and subsidy. There was a huge jump in the value of land, and that jump in the value of land allowed for people to be able to pay for and subsidize college education, which provided a return where other communities was denied that same investment opportunity. So that subsidy should come in some form of forgiveness, or that reparations should come in that form. There should obviously be quality access or access to quality, available, and equitable mental and physical health care, freedom of access to clean, unpolluted physical spaces, a livable wage, or a UBI that is paid either through a tax benefit or direct payment to individuals who qualify, release, and social rehabilitation of those who are incarcerated through some sort of tiered system that allows for community reentry, and then the community to own that social process of their reentry. Parity, equity programs, and ownership across the board, because none of it would exist really without the toil of not only slaves, but those who came after and were denigrated either through stolen wages or through the continuation of slave labor, and then culturally inclusive educational reform. So these are some of my ideas, some of my arguments for what a reparations package would include. Obviously, this looks different for different people. When we talk about intersectionality, there might be more that would be added to target particular groups. But I think at a base level, history justifies at least this as a base starting point for where it is that we go in the reparations discussion.
So before we move forward on that, Thomas, I think this is the rubber meets the road part of the conversation, where, Kate mentioned earlier that, I'm getting pushback from my friend circle. Well, if you were getting pushback on just identifying the problems that we've talked about, you say the R word. There's two R words in this conversation: racist and reparations. You say those two words and, you throw in white privilege and you might be fighting somebody. Those are just immediate fire points, or just they're very, very volatile things. And I think this is what it comes down to. Well, how do we fix it? Right. And the thing that I see often in this conversation is people want to say, why are we asking this child to pay for their great-great-grandfather's problems? The reality is we're not. The reality is we're asking the government to make good on the promise that they gave to all people. And it has nothing to do with an individual, well, I shouldn't say nothing to do, but it's not directly tied to an individual white person in America. It is the promise that America made to all citizens that it has withheld from a section of citizens. So people want to go, as we present these governmental global solutions to problems that exist within the Black community that have been proliferated by the government, and say, well, it's not my fault. Nobody's saying it is. All we're saying is the government needs to fix it. And when they do, there is likely going to be an impact on all people. Now, let me give you a little bit of information. Most people think that's going to be a negative impact on the white community because you're going to have to take from them in order to benefit Black people. But the reality is the studies have been done that if we were to close the racial wealth gap, those numbers that we were looking at 3 or 4 slides ago, if we were to rise the Black community just to average, there would be a $1.2 trillion net increase to our GDP over a 10-year period. Because when you give more wealth into a system, more wealth cycles through the system. I mean, just think about your own personal life. If you can remember a time, or maybe you're at that time now, where finances were very, very tight. Did you buy a new car every 3 years? Or did you limp along with the same one that you had that was passed down to you from your grandfather and you just kept it going, right? That doesn't improve the economy. Did you buy a new home? Or did you just continue to stay at home with your parents or rent a place? We all know that the purchase of real estate ignites 5 or 6 other economic transactions below it and puts money in. When one person buys a home, about 12 different people get paid on that purchase. Some of them very, very well. So if we could close the wealth gap and the Black community was not paycheck to paycheck, hand in foot by such a large, or hand in mouth by such a large degree, we would put more money into the economy because it would be spent on things like purchasing homes, purchasing vehicles, putting children in private school or sending them to college, who then can be our next creators and inventors and who can provide for us the clean energy that everybody desires into the future, right? So there is no net loss to an individual. It's a net gain to all people. And there is no attack on an individual person saying you need to pay the price for what your ancestors did to my ancestors. We're just coming here saying the United States government has promised something that it hasn't provided. And we have, over the course of the last 13, 14, 15 weeks, however long we've done this, we have proven that it has systemically excluded this group of people, and we want to hold them accountable to correcting that.
I mean, and the interesting thing is we don't need to look beyond history for the justification for your argument, right? Like, we've covered the New Deal, we have covered the Homestead Acts, we've covered all of the various laws that were put in place that disproportionately favored a particular group, right? Because that type of stimulus was needed, okay? But again, that access was lacking. And actually there's another resource that we're going to talk about, but we do have some bills that have been put forward on the federal level, one in the House, one in the Senate. These are them. They'll be in the email follow-up, something to review. But quite honestly, again, I think these fall short. I think we should be looking beyond 1865. Like, slavery didn't end in 1865. Sharecropping and convict leasing and all of those things where people were subjected to Black laws and other laws that literally just punished them for being Black and then made them slaves, how do we turn a blind eye to that just because we classified them criminal instead of slave? Like that's an inherent contradiction that literally survives to this day, where we classify people as criminal and then they get that less than human status. And it doesn't matter what you do to them. It doesn't matter what you make them do. Doesn't matter what output we're able to gain from them because they're no longer human. Right. So we took the slave badge and we slapped it on criminal. We changed it with criminal, and then we criminalize you for being Black. We criminalize you for showing up to vote. We criminalize you for showing up for school. We criminalize you for walking out in public, for crossing on the wrong side of the street, for not being in the house at the right time, for being in the wrong neighborhoods. Criminalized for ridiculous reasons. And now that you're a criminal, guess what? Back to slavery per the Constitution, right? So even this falls far short of the true injustice that runs inherent in what this system has done to Black and minority people.
And I was just going to say, it's at that point when we exchange labels from Black and slave to criminal, that this now truly impacts the American culture as a whole, because now you have people who, they're in prison and they do prison labor, they work inside the prison and they earn something. But the cost, what they earn in a month is what it costs them to have a 15-minute phone call with a relative. That is slavery. That is enslavement. And just because they committed a crime, we remove their humanity. Now, what's the level of that crime that justifies the loss of someone's humanity and treatment at a base level? And by the way, how effective is a punishment-based system versus a restoration-based system? Because simply punishing someone for a crime that they commit, does that change their behavior? Does that change their thinking pattern? And the other piece that we should touch in here, Thomas, I don't recall seeing it in the document, is how do we fund all this? If we're gonna give land away and pay for people's education, and how do we, where does the dollars come from in these to fund these programs?
Are you asking me?
I am.
Well, I mean, I have a number of different mechanisms, but I would even say tax breaks, right? If instead of taking in money, right, we can just forgive money. Okay, if we could give cards and people could use these cards to make these particular purchases, and when you make a purchase on the card, literally you're exempt from taxes, and that takes away from whatever your particular subsidy is. That way there isn't any direct particular transfer of funds. That's the first part, the income part, right? But I do think that there should be public land, publicly owned land, right, that is titled to people in these land subsidies, right? So that's the other part of it. And quite honestly, I think that there should be an increase in taxation where the government is bringing in more money, and there's a private public co-op in this payment, because basically that's where the reparations is, where it comes from. And actually, that's why I'm sharing this particular website, because it talks about the fact that the entire market, the entire system that we have right now is based on a foundation that have not been paid for, right? So the massive amount of profits, the massive amount of wealth that people are not paying back into the system, right? The tax breaks that Amazon get, that Walmart get, they're getting tax breaks off of a system that they didn't build, right? And that system that was built was never paid for. Right, so that's how we pay for it. There's a bunch of different sources that can be used to pay for this reparations package.
Agreed.
But you hit me out of order with that question. I was expecting to talk about Ben and Jerry's.
And
Huh?
I got to keep you nimble and on your feet.
Well, you know, I was expecting that question to come in the conversation section, but there it is. There's my idea. So you guys can take it from there when we get to it. But here's a site. I'm not going to go through everything here, but for white people who have a hard time understanding this from Black men, right? Listen, Ben and Jerry's, right? Buy a quart of ice cream, go to the website and unpackage all of the justifications that you need for reparations. We will be providing the link, but I want to make sure that that is a resource that is available to you, because I read it and it's like, yeah, exactly, right? So if you need it messaged to you differently than how has been messaged over the gazillion times I'm sure it's been messaged to you by your Black friends, then listen to Ben and Jerry's. You can make an occasion out of it, right? I know my wife just said she wants ice cream. I got you, boo. All right. And I think, let me see. That's it. Like, so let's talk. Based on what we've talked about, anti-racism, what we've talked about, really, if you've been with us from the beginning, and we've talked about active allyship and what that actually means beyond, we talked about the context of whether or not it's performative, whether or not it's actually transformative, whether or not you are actually doing false generosity, which is paying into a system that maintains your privilege in that system without working to undo that system so that the privileges are shared, so that you never have to pay a charity or make a donation, right? We talked about these various frameworks and contexts for social justice, and we've engaged in this discussion on anti-racism, right? So the package here is where do we go from here? Or I think it culminates into where do we go from here?
Is that a question that you're posing to everybody live on Facebook? Just gonna go.
You know what? You can. That's true. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna end the Facebook feed. If you have opinions on Facebook, then feel free to share them in the comments, or jump on the Zoom, which is, I think, shared. But I'm going to end the live stream now. Good night, Facebook.